Now, Stuart Christie was the Scottish anarchist who narrowly escaped the death penalty in Spain for trying to blow up the dictator General Franco. He was also arrested in the 1970s accused of being a member of the Angry Brigade, who were responsible for a series of explosions in London. He was cleared of those charges, but admitted being friendly with members of the group. Stuart's daughter Branwen finds it hard to reconcile the different images of her father.
Dad would always be in and out of town wearing Hawaiian shirts and Panama hats and sunglasses and just so cool.
An anarchist is someone who believes in the principle that no one has the right to be another's master, is prepared to resist all attempts to subordinate him or herself to the arbitrary authority of power politics, and whose positive aspirations are for a free and self-managed society is the only possible basis on which to build a more just and equitable world.
The journalist Duncan Campbell became a friend.
He was a very charming person. He always had a good sense of humour. His book, My Granny Made Me an Anarchist, is very funny. And he had this very attractive quality of being fearless.
The title of Stuart's book was True. He credited his grandmother, who brought him up, as inspiring him to look at the world through questioning eyes. After leaving school, he joined the Labour Party Young Socialists, but became disillusioned with the tactics used to secure votes, and instead fell in with the Glasgow Federation of Anarchists. After moving to London, he met exiled Spanish anarchists who told him about imprisonment and torture experienced at the hands of the Franco regime. Stuart offered to take direct action to assassinate Franco and set off on his mission, hitchhiking across Europe.
He agreed to take explosives from Paris down to Madrid and hand them over to a contact there who had access to the football stadium, Real Madrid's football stadium, and plan was to put a bomb in the VIP stand and Franco would have been blown up.
I wasn't motivated by any feeling of a desire for vengeance or hate. It wasn't so much what he'd done in the past as what he was doing at the present.
He managed to get through Spanish customs. They found his kilt and suggested that he must be gay, but he was using a kilt because it was a good way to get lifts, and he made it all the way to Madrid. But his group had already been infiltrated, and they were kind of waiting for him by the time he arrived.
I don't think he ever thought he was being naive. I think at the time he thought he was doing what he could, and he had so many wonderful comrades, and it was just something that he felt so passionately about.
So he was arrested. What happened to him after he was arrested?
They didn't torture Stuart, but they broke the hands of his contact in front of him, and Stuart signed a confession. And there was a possibility at that stage of him being garroted or throttled. In fact, he got instead a 20-year sentence.
When I asked him about being in prison, it must have been terrible and terrifying. There were moments, but Dad always said that he got off really lightly. But he spoke about it with very fond memories, you know. He met some amazing people. He educated himself. He learnt Spanish.
There will be those who find what he got up to offensive or wrong. How did he deal with his critics?
I think that he felt that his actions were similar to anyone in the Second World War trying to kill Hitler or trying to kill Mussolini, because they were causing so much damage and so much harm and killing so many people themselves. People often remember the Spanish Civil War, but forget that after that there was still an enormous amount of repression, and it's thought that Franco killed, I think, between 30,000 and 50,000 political opponents long after the Civil War had ended. And I think Stuart felt a responsibility on that. So he remained very committed to that. Prisoners who did manage to get exile, he would find a place for them to stay in London. But he also became involved with various libertarians in London, and that led to him being arrested later in early 70s and charged with being a member of the Angry Brigade.
Stuart Christie and the other men accused had spent the past 15 months in prison. The women, though, were allowed bail for part of the time. My colleague Christopher Morris asked Mr. Christie how he felt to be free.
Well, obviously I'm relieved, but I'm still very concerned with the other four who are tonight in Wormwood Scrubs.
Was he a member of the Angry Brigade?
No, he wasn't. I think he was a kind of usual suspect, I think, for the police at the time because of his very obvious connection with anarchism and with explosions. It did become clear to him and to his wife, Brenda, that they couldn't stay that long in London because they were just going to be arrested again on whenever there was a kind of anarchist or libertarian event.
So where did they go?
They went first to Yorkshire, but then they went to Sandy in the Orkneys and were very happy there for many years. Their daughter Branwen was born there, and they started something called Cienfuegos Press, which was a big anarchist publisher, and they brought out lots of books about anarchism and by anarchists. And I think he was very happy there. They were there for 7 years before they kind of felt it was safe enough to come south.
So if he had been successful in creating his perfect state, I suppose, or his perfect country, what do you think it would have looked like?
I don't know. I think you would have had to ask Stuart, and I'm sure he would have had a very entertaining idea. He did say that in the end he was glad that the assassination attempt has not succeeded because in a way it got more publicity, him being arrested and so on, for what Franco was actually doing. And he didn't have blood on his hands at the end of it. And so from that point of view, he was glad that he'd done it, but glad that in the end, nobody had perished at that particular time.
I just find it difficult to answer the tough questions about Dad being an anarchist. It's just so difficult to separate him, Stuart Christie, and then my dad, because, of course, I just think of him as my wonderful, brilliant dad and amazing grandpa to my girls.
Branwen Christie on her father Stuart Christie, who's died aged 74.